The AR-15 is one of the most recognizable objects in modern America. It appears on ranches and ranges, courtrooms and headlines, and in some of the most heated political debates of our time. To its supporters, it's a practical, modular tool, the modern American rifle. And to its critics, it's a symbol of everything they fear about gun culture. But before it became a symbol at all, it was simply an idea. One born out of necessity, engineering innovation, and a unique American mindset. This is the story of America's rifle. After World War II in Korea, US military analysts accepted some hard truths. Most firefights happened under 300 meters. Soldiers rarely used full-powered rifle cartridges to their maximum advantage. And of high import, the ability to put more rounds down range than the enemy is a major key in winning a firefight. The standard US cartridge, the 30-06 fired from this, and its replacement, the 7.62x51 NATO or 308 fired from the M14, FAL, etc., was powerful but heavy and difficult to control under automatic fire. So the Army began looking at rifles that were lighter and fired smaller, higher velocity cartridges. The story begins in the 1950s with a man named Eugene Stoner. Now, Eugene was a prior Marine and a self-taught engineer working for Armalite, a small California company owned by Fairchild Aircraft. At the time, most military rifles followed the same formula. Heavy steel receivers, wooden stocks, and full-power cartridges, like the M1 Garand I just had on the table. Stoner rejected that formula entirely. Instead, he designed a rifle around lightweight aluminum and composite materials, a small yet fast cartridge, a straight line recoil system, which gives much better control under fire. I mean, if we look at traditional designs, let's grab this AK. The stock is actually lower than the bolt reciprocating back and forth, so it gives more of that upward motion just due to physics. And a gas-operated bolt, which we'll get into later. His first major rifle, the AR-10, was chambered in 7.62, a battle rifle cartridge. But that rifle had to compete with the FAL and the M14, and it was too late and too unconventional for US leadership. But Armalite saw where things were going, so they scaled the AR-10 down and came up with the AR-15, which fires your .223 Remington or 5.56. It weighs less, it recoils less, and it allows soldiers to carry a lot more ammunition. And with this 20-inch barrel, the smaller round, flying at a higher velocity, actually does tremendous terminal damage on its target. Despite impressive tests, the Army rejected it. It's not traditional, and that made it controversial. Ultimately, Armalite sold the design to Colt in 1959. Colt then started pushing the design hard. At that time, Curtis LeMay was the Secretary of the Air Force, and he loved the gun. And then, Vietnam happened. Jungle warfare exposed some problems. The M14s were heavy and unwieldy. Why that was a problem when soldiers carried the M1 Garand in the jungles of the Pacific, I do not know, but it is a main point. Also, the full-power battle rifle cartridges were pretty excessive for the close quarters fighting that happens in the jungle, and soldiers would perform much better with lighter, faster handling weapons. And so, the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, overrode the Army's resistance and pushed for adoption of the AR-15. In 1964, the AR-15 officially became the M16, and the darkest chapter of the gun's history was about to unfold. The main thing that went wrong was the ammo powder that was supposed to be used was changed without redesigning the rifle for that powder. The original design was supposed to use .223 Remington using IMR extruded stick powder, which has a specific burn rate and pressure curve and clean burning characteristics. The gas system, cyclic rate, and dwell time were tuned precisely to this powder. And after adoption, the Army allowed ammunition manufacturers to switch to ball powder, mainly because it's cheaper, easier to produce, and available in much larger quantities. But no redesign or retesting of the rifle accompanied the change, and that decision cascaded into disastrous failures. Also, the rifles were issued without cleaning kits. Troops were falsely told the rifle was self-cleaning, and no chrome-lined chamber or bore was initially part of the rifle design. I'd like to give the earlier variants like the 601, 602, M16, the XM16E1 and M16A1, XM177. I'd like to give them all their own kind of chapter video. So we can kind of artistically deep dive into this. If you'd like to see that, go ahead and leave a comment, so at least I know there's an appetite for it. Anyway, the results of these issues was catastrophic jamming in combat. That led to an initial distrust from soldiers as well as investigations in Congress as to what happened. The issues cost lives and damaged their reputation. These problems were addressed over time. The rifle gained a chrome-lined chamber and bore, proper training manuals, cleaning kits, gas system adjustments, and also the addition of a forward assist, which is quite controversial. The improved design from this first era of the AR came to be known as the M16A1. And once all those issues were corrected, the M16A1 proved that its design was sound. It was accurate, controllable, and effective in jungle warfare. More importantly, an entire generation of American warfighters came home intimately familiar with the platform. They learned it, they carried it, and they trusted it. And when they came home, they did not forget it. In the 1970s, Colt began selling the AR-15 platform to civilians. At first, it wasn't revolutionary to anybody, but veterans liked it and they brought their knowledge home. It was used for varmint hunting, target shooting, ranch and farm defense, and it had advantages that traditional sporting rifles didn't. It was lighter and easier to shoot. Gun magazines and sporting culture began to promote the AR-15 as a practical tool, a do-everything rifle, and something distinctly American in an engineering mindset. This is when the AR-15 moved from military necessity to civilian staple. And further development would continue on the military side of things. This is the M16A2. By the late 1970s, new realities had emerged. The US was standardizing weapons across NATO. Engagement distances were expected to increase in Europe, and the Marine Corps wanted greater accuracy, durability, and an emphasis on marksmanship. The M16A2 was not meant to fix a bad rifle. It was meant to optimize a proven one for Cold War era warfare. If you look at the first generation cartridge, it is a 55 grain full metal jacket. To stabilize this, the M16A1 had a 1 in 12 twist. That was optimized for jungle warfare. NATO wanted a heavier cartridge that could shoot longer ranges and have a bit of barrier penetration. And so, from the M193 of the previous generation, we upgrade to the SS109 or M855 green tip. This has a steel penetrator, and the barrel twist rate was changed from a 1 in 12 to a 1 in 7 to be able to stabilize that heavier bullet. The barrel also got heavier. If you notice, this is a very thin pencil barrel compared to what we see in the A2, although it weirdly stays thin under the handguard. But apparently, it reduced barrel flex and reduced heat-induced point of impact shift. So, the barrel's gaining weight, but it's better for sustained fire and marksmanship, according to the Marine Corps. I'm just kidding. I've shot both of these side by side, and this one's a lot more accurate. To further compare, we go from this very simple windage-only adjustable rear sight to this fully adjustable rear sight with elevation and windage. It goes out to 800 meters, which is very optimistic, but doctrinal. It sort of reflects the Marine Corps philosophy of every Marine a rifleman. The fire control unit is a burst in the M16A2. So whereas in the A1 you had safe, semi, and full auto, in the A2 you have safe, semi, and 3-shot burst. It's terrible. The idea was to prevent wasting ammo, improve hit probability, and encourage disciplined fire. It doesn't work very well. It doesn't reset evenly, meaning that your trigger pull can vary depending on where the cam stops. So if you fire 2 and let go real quick, you'll have a completely different trigger pull when you go to do it again, and it'll only shoot the 1 because the cam has to go through all 3 to reset. And each stage has a different trigger feeling. This is something that many soldiers disliked, including me, because it's dumb. If we look at the handguards, these are triangular and thin. You can see these originals are broken. And then the A2s is round, symmetrical, so you can put top and bottom on either way. And the heat shields work better. The A2 stock is 5/8 of an inch longer, and they added the brass deflector, so if you're wrong-handed, you don't get slapped in the face with spent cartridges. To me, these changes reflect a shift towards standardization and long-term service versus lightweight maneuverability that the A1 had. So, lightweight, Fast handling, optimized for short engagements. Heavier, more precise, built for conventional warfare and NATO standardization. The M16A2 would become the foundation for the M16A3 and A4, as well as modern carbines that we still use today. This is the M16A4. Quick note, the M16A3 is basically the same thing as the M16A2, but it has full auto instead of burst, and it was very limited issue to the Navy. By the late 1990s, optics like the ACOG proved dramatically effective, and soldiers and Marines demanded faster target acquisition. The fixed carry handle of the previous M16s we talked about was now a liability. Mounting optics became awkward and inconsistent. Here we have a detachable carry handle that came on our M16A4s and then got taken off and thrown in a box in the arms room. But to demonstrate, to mount optics onto your M16A2s, we had these bars with the screw right here that you would basically attach inside your carry handle and then mount your optic here. When I was a young lad, I had a M68 optic, red dot, on my 20-inch rifle. It was pretty sweet. The M16A4 was adopted in the early 2000s, mostly by the Marine Corps, but the Army also got them. The M16A4 kept what worked and modernized what didn't. Like I said, we replaced the carry handle, so now you have Picatinny rail across the top and allowed mounting of optics like the ACOG. We also removed the plastic handguards and replaced it with these Knights Armament Corporation, CAC, M5 RAS rails. They let you mount things like the PEC-15, weapon lights, these Knights Armament rail panels and vertical foregrips. When we got issued these, we also got issued a couple bags of these. There's bags filled with the Knights Armament rails and a couple of handguards. Pretty cool. Actually, when I say that, I never got issued an M16A4. I'm talking about an M4, but it's basically the same thing. The M4A1s we got were the flat top receivers with the Knights Armament rails. Although the M4A1s we got had these SOCOM profile barrels, this is just a standard government profile. Same as the M16A2. Which is to say, it basically is the same core rifle as the M16A2, plus Picatinny upper receiver, Picatinny rail. Same operating system and same 3-round burst. In other words, the A4 is the A2 optimized for the modern warfare that we saw in the GWOT. And I'd like to say that the M16A4 represents the final evolution of the 20-inch fighting rifle for us. Before we depart with this rifle, I just want to talk about how the M16A5 almost existed. It kind of represents a crossroad moment where the military had to decide, do we continue evolving the 20-inch rifle or move over to the 14.5-inch carbine? But the A5 was never formally adopted, and it was never standardized like the A2 or the A4. Instead, it was a late 2000s proposal, primarily associated with the Marine Corps, to modernize their M16 one last time. The main issue driving the A5 concept was not having an adjustable length of pull. Body armor had become standard in US service, and having this long stock was awkward when you had to put it up against your body armor strap. Also, there's a lot of pictures and videos of Marines fighting urban combat like in Fallujah, where they're trying to clear buildings, and you see them like this, with their stocks up on their shoulders, using the both eyes open method with their ACOG to take down targets as if it's a red dot. It was called the Binden aiming concept, the BAC, if I remember correctly. And it worked, but imagine if you could just adjust your stock. And M4 carbines showed the value of having your adjustable stock. On this BCM, this actually has a Voltor A5 buffer system that was the concept design for the M16A5. So you can't really tell the difference when you're just looking at it, but it basically takes a rifle length spring and buffer and makes it super smooth to shoot. I absolutely love it, and I'm glad that it was developed. This Sons of Liberty Gunworks also has the A5 system. This is a 12.5-inch, and it is the smoothest gun I have ever built. That is the end of our 20-inch AR-15s. Let's move on to the carbines. We did experiment with shorter AR-15s in the Vietnam era, but they were never standardized. I'll do a deep dive on the XM177 and the CAR-15 series in a future video. So the M4 carbine was the first carbine to be adopted. It actually looked basically just like the M16A2, but with the collapsible stock shorter gas system and barrel, but would have looked like this, if you can see that. The M4 was the first carbine to be officially serviced. It was the early 90s, shortly after the A2 came to be. So it has a 14.5-inch barrel rather than a 20-inch. On the rifle it ends here, on the carbine it ends here, so it's much shorter. It also has the telescoping stock for armor and vehicle use. Makes it much easier getting in and out of places, much more maneuverable. So they were first embraced by, one, smaller people, but special forces and airborne also got them. They feed the same magazines. They're still shooting the 62 grain green tip M855 ammunition. And just like the M16A2, the original M4 carbine had 3-shot burst rather than full auto. Everyone would move to the M4A1. Over time, it got a heavier profile SOCOM barrel, which basically eliminates the weight savings we got from going from a rifle to a carbine, but it's very accurate. It also has full auto rather than 3-shot burst. And you can see that we kind of went from this Picatinny quad rail that locks at this point and here, so it's not free floated. It pinches your barrel here, to this free float design that doesn't touch anywhere except right here. Great for barrel harmonics and accuracy. It's also a lot more durable overall. So think M16A2, M4, end of the Cold War era, M16A4 and M4A1, GWOT era. That's very broad and not at all helpful, but I will make a video about this era of the AR15. Again, comment below if there's any interest. The M4A1 became the standard service weapon, rifle, carbine of the US Army when I was in. And the first ones we got had the SOCOM profile barrel, but had the non-free floated rails with the Knight's Armament attachments. This is the version that I carried in Iraq and Syria. I was on crusade against the forces of ISIS. Personally used the ACOG on mine, just because I like it. But you usually see people running an EOTech or an Aimpoint Red Dot or the LCAN. You can switch between 1 and 4 magnification, whereas the ACOG is 4, and then the EOTech and the Aimpoint are both 1. It's kind of cool. And even as new rifles like the SIG M7, the Spear variant of the MCX, make their way into the military, the M4's design philosophy continues to influence the ergonomics of modern warfare. Plus the SIG's just an AR-18. And that ends, I guess, the second generation, the GWOT generation of the AR-15. Enter Modularity. This is the URGI, or the Upper Receiver Group Improved. This is where the AR-15 becomes something new. It's not just a rifle, it's a platform. One owner can configure the same rifle for competition, hunting, home defense, duty use, you name it. This is the same core design as this, adapted to a different need. And that idea of modularity, combined with American manufacturing and entrepreneurship, has created an enormous aftermarket. Small companies have flourished. Innovation has exploded, and prices have been falling. The AR-15 stopped being niche and became common. And those ideas fed into the military's improvements on the M4A1. As the market grew with better optics, better accessories, grips, lights, and lasers, we got more modularity and better ergonomics. Unlike these Knight's Armament and Daniel Defense rails of the old Picatinny days of the GWOT, this further development of the AR-15 has M-LOK. You have full-length accessory mounting with low-profile gas blocks and no barrel contact. Similar to these, but a lot lighter and more ergonomic. Rather than heavy cheese graters known as Picatinny in the middle of your hand, you have this slimline rail made by Geisley called the Mark 16, but tons of companies are making these, including Daniel Defense and Knight's Armament, and you can basically attach anything. These improvements have been driven, one, by military requirement, but also by civilian marksmanship and commercial innovation. Side note, this is called M-LOK. There was also something called Keymod that's kind of disappeared from the market. They were in sort of a format war similar to Blu-ray versus HD DVD, VHS versus Betamax, etc. M-LOK ultimately won the format war, so that's what we see most prevalent today. This URGI specifically is part of a broader shift. It was developed under US SOCOM to modernize the M4A1 even further. They updated the gas system length to be between a rifle and carbine length. It's called a mid-length. It also uses a cold hammer forged barrel. Similar to AKs, they just last a lot longer and they're very accurate. And it also uses a more conservative gas port size, so It's more control over the amount of gas that actually makes it back here. So you have lower gas pressure at the port, smoother recoil impulse, reduced bolt speed, less wear on internal, and it's more suppressor friendly, which many soldiers are moving towards using suppressors. The URGI also uses a new kind of buffer system called the Super 42. Instead of your traditional piano wire wrap, it's dual braided, similar to an MG42 spring. It has a more consistent return force and has a longer service life than your traditional music wire spring. I'll talk more about the muzzle devices across the generations in the deep dive videos. Anyway, this is what's being fielded today to Rangers, Special Operations. I don't know that it will make it to frontline units now that the 6-hour M7 rifles chambered in 6.8 or 277 Fury are becoming the service rifle. Who knows what's going to happen right now, but also there's a brand new AR-15 that just got selected for Special Operations. It is called the Sons of Liberty Gunworks Mark I. This is not one of those. This is a Sons of Liberty Gunworks. This is their M76 variant. But since I had a Sons of Liberty Gunworks, I figured I'd put it up here while I talk about their new one that was just selected. The U.S. Special Operations Command has selected a new rifle from Sons of Liberty Gunworks for use by elite forces, marking a notable move in military small arms procurement. The Sons of Liberty Gunworks Mark I. So the Mark I is being touted as the super cool new highly rigid platform. I'm sure it is. I have not touched one. To quote, the Sons of Liberty Gunworks Mark I was chosen by U.S. Special Operations Command for its combat assault rifle program after rigorous testing in extreme environments. I don't know if the new Mark I competed against the URGI, because I feel like it's a very highly performing carbine, and there's nothing I can find online. So if you can help me, I'd appreciate it. I have this Sons of Liberty Gunworks upper, and I absolutely love it. This is the Sage Dynamics 12.5. I built it as my optimal East Coast gun when I was living over there. But anyway, that's the evolution of the AR-15 from its earliest days to where we're at as of like a month ago. I want to talk about politics real quick. I forgot to talk about the M855A1. So everything changed for the AR-15 in 1994 with the federal assault weapons ban. In the late 80s and early 90s, the United States was actually dealing with incredibly high crime rates, specifically in its major cities. And at the same time, there were several high-profile mass shootings. One of the most covered was the 1989 Stockton schoolyard shooting in California. And media news outlets started focusing a lot on military-looking semi-automatic rifles, even though they function no differently than a normal sporting rifle. But public pressure mounted, and politicians responded. Many firearms were classified as assault weapons, based largely on cosmetic features. So, pistol grips, flash suppressors, folding or telescoping stocks on the carbines, and bayonet lugs made these rifles become haram. Gun owners, firearms manufacturers, civil liberty groups, they all argued that this was targeted. It was about appearance, not function. They punished us lawful owners instead of just criminals. And they set a precedent for broader restrictions. But later that year, in 1994, Democrats who voted for this suffered major losses in the midterms, and rightfully so. Many lawmakers, especially in rural and swing districts, blamed their support for the assault weapons ban for costing them their seats. And that lesson stuck. For the next decade, renewing that ban became politically risky. And so 10 years later, the ban expired. You see, the assault weapons ban includes a 10-year sunset clause, meaning unless Congress acted to renew it, the ban would automatically expire in 2004. So there was no emergency vote, no dramatic repeal, it simply ended. Side note, in the early 2000s, the Department of Justice funded studies that examined the ban's effects. They found assault weapons were used in a very small percentage of gun crime. There was no evidence that the ban reduced violent crimes, and when violent crimes did happen, criminals just went and got what they could get. This made defending the ban very difficult. The ban did not eliminate the AR-15. Instead, it transformed it. The rifle became a stand-in for larger arguments: individual liberty, government authority, the meaning of the Second Amendment, and ownership surged after the ban expired. Manufacturers multiplied and public awareness skyrocketed. Gun advocacy groups started toting the rifle as America's rifle, framing the AR-15 as the modern expression of an old right. And from that point forward, it wasn't just a rifle, it was part of our identity. And the AR-15 didn't earn that identity because it's the most powerful, it's not, or the oldest, it's definitely not. I would argue that the M1 Garand was America's rifle. And before that, the Springfield 1903. And before that, Springfield trapdoors then rifle muskets, then muskets, which all spanned hundreds of years as our service rifles. But the AR-15 is our service rifle today, and it is America's rifle. It represents American culture itself, individualism, build it your way, innovation, constant refinement and improvement, civilian ownership, not reserved for the elites, and debate and disagreement. Freedom is rarely quiet. No other rifle exists at the intersection of military service, civilian life, industry, and politics all at the same time. That's why you see it everywhere. That's why it provokes strong reactions. And that's why the conversations around it never end. The AR-15 began as a lightweight military experiment, evolved into a civilian tool, and ultimately became our national symbol. Whether viewed as a practical rifle, a constitutional touchstone, or a cultural lightning rod, one thing is undeniable. The AR-15 is a core story of America, its values, its conflicts, and its constant push towards modernization. That's why it's America's rifle. And we're not nearly done talking about it, so subscribe and stay tuned. Today, Emeritism runs on Guinness.